All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to tackle a really unusual idea, one that pretty much flips a skill we all take for granted, reading, completely on its head. We're going to explore a pretty fascinating method that comes out of quantum grammar, and it all starts with a very simple but very weird question. So, here it is. Why on earth would you ever analyze a sentence backward? From the last word to the first? It sounds totally wrong, doesn't it? It goes against everything you've ever been taught. But according to the source for this explainer, there's actually a very specific and surprisingly logical reason for doing exactly that. And look, this isn't just some random thought experiment someone dreamed up. It's a real puzzle for anybody who sees this technique in action for the first time. So to really get the answer, we first need to define what's actually going on here. So first things first, let's get a key term out of the way. The process we're talking about is called syntaxing. It's just the technical name for, breaking down a sentence, figuring out what all the parts are, and understanding how they all fit together. Now, the way we all learn to do this in school is, of course, from left to right. You start with the first word, and you move forward. It just feels natural because, well, that's how we read. But what if that simple, intuitive path is actually a trap? And that's where we get to what the source material calls the forward path problem. The whole argument is that this normal left-to-right way of doing things is actually kind of inefficient, and more importantly, it's super easy to make mistakes, especially if you're just learning. With the conventional method, there are a couple of big problems. First, when you're analyzing from the front, you're way more likely to make mistakes that force you to stop, go back, and fix everything. But here's the really interesting part. The second problem the source points out is that the whole process can get tangled up with our own ego. This quote from the source for our explainer, Jason Matthew Glass, just nails that feeling, doesn't it? He points out how you can be moving along, thinking you've got it, only to hit a wall and realize a mistake you made 5 words ago just broke everything. It's that frustrating loop of having to start all over again. So listen, the big deal here isn't just that you make mistakes. That's part of learning anything, right? The real problem is just human nature. According to this view, our own ego can make it really hard to just admit we were wrong and go back and fix it. The source ties this to a bigger idea they call contract as by consent. Basically, no one can force you to see your own error. You have to agree that you were wrong. And sometimes our ego just doesn't want to sign that contract. Okay, so if going forward is like walking through a minefield of mistakes and ego traps, what's the solution? Well, the source suggests an alternative that completely reframes the whole thing, and it's all built on one single, powerful idea. And here it is. The entire philosophy is captured in this one little phrase we all know. Hindsight is 20/20. When you look back at something that's already happened, the path is perfectly clear. So the question becomes, what if you could tap into the power of that hindsight right from the beginning? Well, the backward method claims you can. So, how does this actually work in practice? It's basically a 4-step process. First, you start at the very last word of the sentence. Then, for each word, as you move backward, you ask a bunch of questions to classify it. Step 3 is pretty cool. You credential a few key words by looking up their etymology, their original historical meanings. And only after you've collected all that factual data do you move to step 4, using that solid foundation to analyze the grammar with way more clarity. And when you put the two methods side by side like this, the difference is, well, it's pretty stark, isn't it? The forward path is full of guesswork and backtracking, but by starting at the end, the source claims you get instant context for every single word. And the results? A process with, and I quote, little to no room for error, which they argue makes it the best, most effective way for a beginner to get it right from the very start. Now, all of this sounds pretty neat and logical, right? But, and this is a big but, the source is super clear that learning this skill is incredibly difficult. It takes a very specific kind of dedication and a breakthrough moment, which they explain with a really great analogy. And just to give you a sense of how hard we're talking here, get this. In over 9 years of teaching this stuff, the source says that fewer than 24 students have actually mastered it to the point where they can do it on their own. That's a tiny number. The reason it's so tough is that the skill is a bit like algebra. If you don't use it every single day, you just forget it. It requires constant practice. That is, until you have what they call the aha moment. And this is the bicycle analogy. And it's perfect. Learning to syntax backward is just like learning to ride a bike. You're going to try, and you're going to fall. You'll get scraped up, you'll get frustrated. You just have to keep getting back on. Then, one day, almost out of nowhere, It just clicks. And once it clicks, you never, ever forget how. But until you hit that magic point, if you stop practicing, you lose it all. All right, so let's bring this all together. We've looked at a totally unconventional way to look at language, one that really challenges the very direction we're taught to think in. So what's the big takeaway here? The entire argument really just boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. By starting your analysis at the end of the sentence, you are essentially giving yourself the gift of perfect 20/20 hindsight right from the very first word you look at. And that kind of leaves us with a bigger question to chew on, one that goes way beyond grammar, right? What if the key to really understanding any complex system isn't just about plowing ahead, but about having the courage to stop, turn around, and look at the whole problem from a completely different direction? What kind of new things might we see if we did?